냥 제진 모조는 닝미정 zon을 모놈 점볼 나겨 그러던 검산도 실물도 돈바 되제 장라기 좀
We are studying the Analects today. I'm not feeling very well physically today, so I might not teach very well or deliver the lesson as effectively as usual. Next week we'll discuss the treatise on the nature of treasure. And then on the following Saturday, we'll return to the Analects of Confucius. I'm just letting everyone know about the schedule.
下面
Now we continue studying the Analects of Confucius. Today we'll be discussing chapter 9 in detail. So this particular classical text of the Analects, it's an ancient philosophy that originated from over 2,000 years ago. How can such a profound philosophy be effectively applied in our complex present era? How do we practically use its principles in our daily lives? This is indeed something that many of us should genuinely care about and actively consider. As for its actual content, we don't necessarily need to express an opinion or make a judgment on whether something is inherently good or bad. In the entire process of learning and studying these teachings, does it really have its true value and significance? I believe that everyone has the natural ability to analyze things and possesses the discriminating wisdom needed for understanding, just as it clearly says in the classical text, praise surpassing the gods. It says that I don't necessarily stand on Buddha's side or position, nor do I stand with the particular views of non-Buddhist teachers and other outside practitioners. Whoever truly speaks the genuine truth and wisdom, I will sincerely regard him as my fundamental root teacher. Just like us in this entire whole wide world, we also don't say that just because it's Confucian thought, or we could say it completely aligns with Buddhist viewpoints and perspectives. We definitely won't attach any particular sectarian or religious labels to these important teachings and concepts. We simply discuss it from a theoretical perspective or from the intellectual standpoint of its inherent logic and foundational principles. When it comes to profound teachings or comprehensive treatises such as these that are prevalent today, especially when we endeavor to apply them in the context of our daily lives and practical experiences. So, how exactly should we proceed with this? As for this particular point, we can employ our own well-established methods of analysis to carefully make an informed decision. In doing so, we can understand the situation. Perhaps if we diligently study and delve into the subject matter, just by relying solely upon this comprehensive treatise alone, we can effectively resolve many significant issues of conduct and interaction within the world. Back in the early years of the Song dynasty, at the very beginning of this significant historical period, at that historical juncture, there was indeed a founding prime minister. The very first emperor was Emperor Taizu of Song, was he not? During that specific period, there was a prominent minister named Zhao Pu. At the very beginning, his status and position were not very remarkable, but later on he studied very diligently on his own initiative, relying specifically on the teachings of the Analects to help the emperor effectively govern and manage the entire country and its people. What did people later call this remarkable achievement? They said, half of the Analects is truly enough to govern the world. This is a very well-known praise, a saying that genuinely exists. Throughout the first emperor's entire life, Zhao Pu was considered his most capable and trusted advisor, most wise and most competent official. Whenever it came to making decisions, he was an exceptionally skillful and remarkably resourceful individual. Indeed, such a truly remarkable person was he. Subsequently, this emperor's younger brother inherited his throne. When the second emperor of the Song dynasty came to power, this prime minister continued to serve as his prime minister. One time, he was specifically asked by an individual, "Why are you so exceptionally capable? Others often say that you govern the entire world with just half of the Analects. Is that really just true?" He replied, "During your brother's entire lifetime, I used the entire first half of the Analects to effectively govern the world. In the same way, during your reign as emperor, I will continue to assist and support you in governing the country and managing the people." I can actually just use the next part now then, indeed. In other words, governing the world with half of the Analects. This means that for the previous emperor of the Song dynasty, it was a significant event. He used the first part of the Analects to govern the world. And when it came to the next emperor of the Song dynasty, he effectively used the latter part of the Analects to govern the entire world with great success. There is such a saying, and there are also such records in history. So I think, although we may not be able to completely govern the entire world, at the very least, whatever we do should be done with great care and consideration. We should follow such universal truths of the world, which may indeed be very quite necessary. This includes some Buddhists among us who truly think very highly of their own personal character indeed, and believe they are thoroughly versed in all worldly matters, and that they don't need any further education or improvement. There are people who think this way, but in reality, whether it's when actually doing things or in the process of being a person, perhaps what we really need is the basic education on how to be a good person. This kind of fundamental education, precisely because we don't understand in our everyday daily lives, we often end up committing numerous wrongdoings and transgressions. In this way, it becomes unnecessary. If we can recognize and understand these fundamental worldly truths much earlier in our lives, then based on this solid foundation, we can further and more deeply develop our understanding and appreciation of Buddhist teachings and philosophy, and use the spirit of Mahayana Buddhism to benefit all sentient beings. So I think when our revered guru was still alive, he actually placed great importance on teachings about worldly conduct. During his lifetime, he also gave many teachings, including those from Mipham Rinpoche and Nagarjuna Bodhisattva, as well as the highly esteemed and influential Sakya Pandita. He spoke extensively and in great detail about their worldly codes of conduct, which included ethical principles and moral guidelines. It is precisely because of this significant reason that later, among his dedicated lineage disciples, not only did they attain a certain level of accomplishment in Buddhism, but also when it came to making choices in worldly matters, they demonstrated a distinct difference. Perhaps what I'm saying sounds a bit arrogant, or perhaps I'm just stating the plain facts as they are. In any case, the education that each and every one of us has received should indeed be profoundly different and uniquely tailored. If a respected lineage teacher or a wise master places a particular and significant emphasis on a certain specific field of study, then his lineage of students or disciples will also be influenced to varying degrees. So I think that we move on to discuss Chapter 9 in detail. This is Chapter 9 in the important learning section of the Analects. At that time, the respected Master Zhengzi, who was also known as Zhengzan, made this profound statement: "Being cautious at the end and pursuing the distant past, then the people's virtue will naturally return to sincerity and depth." As for being cautious at the end and pursuing the distant past, Shenzhong Zhuiyuan, it is actually one of the idioms that we use quite often nowadays. Of course, there are different ways to interpret this. Some scholars, when explaining it, say that Shenzhong, being cautious at the end. Shen means to be very careful, and Zhong refers to the final endpoint, that is, the ultimate outcome. So it is crucial that we pay very special attention to carefully observe the final, conclusive outcome. Actually, the source of the final outcome, should be traced back to its most distant and fundamental cause. We often say that cause and effect never truly fail, and in fact every single result, if we trace it all the way back, invariably has a preceding cause. If we place a special and significant emphasis on this fundamental concept of cause and effect, then in this way, the people's virtue and moral character, as well as the ethical behavior of society and its citizens, will increasingly return to and embody what qualities? They will return to genuine sincerity and moral depth, becoming more and more naturally simple, spiritually pure, and honest in their character. This is one way to interpret it. So what is the most common explanation? Shenjong means that when your parents pass away, you need to carefully handle their final affairs and arrangements in life, showing proper respect. When taking care of these final matters, you must not be careless or sloppy about it. You should treat it with seriousness. This is Shenjong, being cautious at the end. As for Zhueyuan, remembering ancestors from afar, no matter who we are as individuals, we all have our own ancestors and forebears from generations past, and we should definitely give proper importance and respectful attention to their memorial rites and commemorative ceremonies. Honoring our ancestors through these ancient and rituals and meticulously making offerings to them, these are practices that truly deserve our careful attention and thoughtful consideration. So, in ancient times, in many different people's long-standing customs and traditions, this idea of Shenjong Zhueyuan, being cautious at the end and honoring the distant past, was often inscribed on ancestral tablets or name plaques, and this was a common tradition. So here, this concept can be understood from two different perspectives and viewpoints. First of all, according to traditional Confucian philosophical thought and teachings, they did not emphasize or focus on the existence of people's past lives or future lives and reincarnation. Of course, some commentaries say that Confucianism does not acknowledge this at all. Actually, I think it's not that they don't acknowledge it. It's just that it's not explicitly stated within their original written texts. If it's not explicit, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not acknowledged. Because in some cases, due to the constraints of their culture and certain philosophies, they simply didn't really place any particular special emphasis on it at all. If they truly didn't acknowledge it, they might have used certain doctrines or teachings to completely refute it and establish their own very clear standpoint, saying that Confucianism does not acknowledge future lives. They should have, with solid reasoning, established their own distinct sect in this particular way. But this is something that we almost never see. When we carefully examine the very reliable and ancient texts of Confucianism, it becomes quite evident that sometimes Confucius himself profoundly stated, "If you do not even truly understand life, how can you possibly comprehend death?" But this statement does not mean denying the existence of anything after death, because he felt that life and death, these two issues, are extremely profound. Even what people often think of as the so-called phenomenon of life, if you truly want to explain its origin clearly and comprehensively, theoretically speaking, it's very difficult to comprehend. So what exactly happens after death? Who can truly say for sure? So based on this profound statement, can we really say that Confucianism does not acknowledge an afterlife? This is something worth considering for everyone. So in this context, regardless of whether the afterlife is acknowledged or not, it is indeed the case that in Confucian culture, what can we see? Not only does it emphasize a person's sense of family while alive and their sense of family values, but it also places great importance on personal cultivation. Even more importantly, after a person dies, indeed, whether it's one's own parents or powerful kings, esteemed ministers, or indeed anyone else, after a person passes away, great importance is truly placed on their ancestral tablets and the sacred rituals held for them, and on all kinds of significant ceremonies for them. Actually, if Confucianism truly didn't acknowledge an afterlife, and it was all just symbolic in its very nature, I don't think Confucianism would go to such lengths. For example, the ancestors from ancient times, those who lived and breathed many generations ago, they have long since passed away, decades, even hundreds of years ago. If their souls, if all of their spirits, their very essences, truly did not exist at all, and we were only relying on their tombstones, their very existence, and just doing things with those, wouldn't that be an especially foolish and utterly senseless thing to do? I think, although in traditional culture it is often considered to be the case, there isn't a particularly explicit emphasis on the existence of the soul after death. In reality, people do in fact acknowledge it. The reason they acknowledge it is because we often go to places like sky burials. So there are some ancient tombstones, some solemn graves, and in those particular places, everyone is especially cautious and very, very superstitious. If someone truly had to spend a night among many graves, indeed, most people wouldn't dare to do it. And if they don't dare, what's the reason? It should be that aside from our current material, physical bodies, there are also things that we cannot readily perceive, such as intermediate states or spirits and deities that are present there. This particular point should indeed be considered valid. Actually, regarding this point, I saw in a Buddhist scripture called the Abhisheka Sutra. The Abhisheka Sutra was translated during the Eastern Jin dynasty. The translator's name is rather long, and I don't remember it very clearly. But in it, at that particular time, the Venerable Ananda respectfully asked the Buddha, after a person truly dies, at the grave or at the stupa, what should be done? Is there a soul? Does it exist or not? He asked the Buddha at that time. When he asked the Buddha said in response to his query, it both exists and does not exist. His very soul is at the grave. It both truly exists and simultaneously does not exist. Then Ananda, with a thoughtful expression, asked again, what do you mean by that? Both exists and does not exist. Does it exist or not exactly? It seems like my illness is progressively getting better and better. He then thoughtfully asked, does it truly exist or not, after all? Following this, the Buddha began to carefully analyze, saying that in some specific cases it absolutely does not exist. Which particular cases are those, he pondered. If someone accumulated a lot of very virtuous deeds in the past, for such a person after death, they either are directly reborn into the heavenly realms or are reborn into a wealthy and noble family among humans, enjoying a life of privilege. As for those who have committed very serious negative karma after they die, they fall into the realms of hell, hungry ghosts, or animals respectively, and some individuals go directly to the fiery depths of hell. Then there are some who are often in a neutral, indeterminate state, whose good and bad deeds are not particularly significant. There are some people like this, whose negative karma is not serious and positive karma not significant. They live daily just like animals with no concept of good or evil. Such people, where exactly do they choose to live and reside? They live near graveyards and burial sites, and some of them stay there for very long periods of time. Initially, they treat these graves, burial mounds, and memorial stupas. They take it as their place of reliance. They always believe that this is their place of dependence. They just stay there until, in the end, if they have their own ashes in that case, they even regard these ashes, the remains, as their own, and rely on them to stay there. When eventually all of the ashes are completely gone and have vanished into thin air, they turn into a kind of vapor, a kind of essence, and at that point they still think of it as their life. Eventually these spiritual influences and energies even spread and attach to the surrounding forests and stone formations. In this particular way, he still continues to remain and linger here in this location. So in the Buddhist sutras and scriptures we have what are called charnel grounds, and sometimes these are graveyards and burial sites. In these places there are indeed some spiritual presences. So if you choose to stay in these places during the nighttime, you really need to be very careful and cautious. Because generally speaking, as for ghosts and spirits, after it gets dark, at dusk, they will typically come out and roam. One time is at dusk when they come out, and then after a while, probably around 9 o'clock in the evening, they will come out again at that particular time. In between, they might sleep soundly for a little while. Then, very close to dawn, they will come out again. So, generally speaking, many of the ancient yogis and dedicated practitioners from the past, those who diligently practiced the chod, the body offering practice, when they ventured to the desolate and often eerie charnel grounds, they all had distinctly different approaches and practices for the early night, midnight, and late night. At that time, they needed to cut off dangerous places, to sever different kinds of dangers in those places. And within the severance practices, there are various methods. So some of our Dharma friends, at first they're full of confidence during the day. They run to the desolate charnel ground. Some individuals set up temporary tents while others go into those small secluded caves, but as night falls, they absolutely don't dare to come out. Some individuals even resort to calling others on the phone, which is a common occurrence in these situations. So it truly is the case that these interactions happen. There used to be a particular place in Chengdu at that time. I'm not entirely sure what it is officially called now, but it was a well-known spot for such activities. but it used to be called Mingwei Guest House. In that particular area nearby, there used to be some old graves and burial sites in the past. The local people who live there say that especially when people are walking around there during the nighttime hours, many different people have heard some strange sounds and voices coming from inside those graves, or all sorts of other peculiar noises. If you looked very closely, you couldn't see anything at all, but if you listened intently, you could hear it quite clearly. So later, many of the people doing construction there didn't dare to work there. This happened too. This is actually a very real phenomenon all over the world. There are many places like this, and of course these phenomena might actually be real souls and genuine spirits of the departed. Some of these are what we call Death Lord spirits. When people die and pass away, these Death Lord spirits have the ability to transform themselves and take on the physical appearance and form of those deceased people, and even imitate their voice. They're very good at changing. They can completely and utterly transform into that person's exact likeness and perfectly mimic their voice as well. They also live there. Some people might not believe this at all, thinking it's all nonsense and that there are no spirits or ghosts. But if that's really the case, why don't you try staying there for a couple of days and see if you can handle it? Some people think they're really tough, but when they actually go there, they end up getting sick or frightened. There are people like that as well. So regarding the nature of souls and spirits after death, there are still many different doctrines and religious teachings on this matter. Moreover, concerning what actually happens to people after they die and pass away, according to traditional Buddhist explanations and teachings, we really do practice reverence for the deceased and remembrance of our ancestors. We will regularly and frequently chant sutras and recite prayers for them. For example, in our Tibetan Buddhist tradition, whether in the Lhasa region, the Amdo area, or the Kham regions, this particular practice is indeed a very common and widespread traditional custom. For instance, during a Dharma assembly, I would write down the names of my deceased parents, as well as my grandfather and my grandmother, all the way back to the names I can remember. Whether it's 7 generations, 6 generations, or 5 generations, I write down the names of many people. Then I offer some money and ask the monks to recite scriptures, or for example, build stupas or carve the Avalokiteshvara mantra. There are many such dedications. This is just one particular method of dedication in Buddhism. Actually, in this particular way, and through these practices, one can also obtain and receive the so-called merit and benefits of dedication and charitable giving. I have seen and read in the Samyukta Agama Sutra that there was once a learned Brahmin priest who approached and asked the Buddha, saying that after a person dies, if offerings are made for them, will they actually receive any real benefit from it? The Buddha said, if this being is directly reborn in hell or other lower realms, they may not necessarily receive it. But what is the only case in which they do receive it? There is a type called the entering place hungry ghost. If they are reborn as an entering place hungry ghost, then all the offerings and dedications we make for them in the human world can all be received by them. Then the Brahmin asked, what if they are not reborn as an entering place hungry ghost? What happens then? He said, in that case, if their relatives or friends are reborn as the entering place hungry ghost, they too will receive this benefit. He asked again, what if the relatives and friends are also not reborn as the entering place hungry ghost? Then what happens? Then the Buddha said, even if these sentient beings do not receive these offerings, because you made offerings and gave Dharma teachings with a kind heart, for this reason you yourself will also accumulate such merit life after life. One also personally gains and obtains much merit and spiritual benefit oneself. So, generally speaking in our tradition, whether we're dealing with the deceased or with our ancestors and forebears, how exactly do we properly honor the dead and respectfully remember our origins and heritage?
There should be 2 ways. One way is, as we see in many of our traditional cultures nowadays, not all of them have this, but setting up a memorial tablet to remember the deceased so that in the family's history, it's truly best to never ever forget this person. Another effective way is like what is commonly done in the Tibetan regions, where the sacred ashes are reverently scattered. They usually place some prayer flags there, or meticulously carve some piles of prayer stones with mantras, or skillfully make delicate satsas, which are small Buddha statues. These are also considered to be very good and highly commendable methods. Very truly good ways to honor the deceased and their memory. And reciting scriptures and dedicating the merit. This is also a method. In the great Tang records on the western regions, it is mentioned that many of the traditional Indian funeral customs and practices after death, such as the ancient water burial, the cremation, the earth burial, and various other distinct types, possibly even the sky burial, or perhaps the more spiritual celestial burial, and so on, encompassing a diverse range of beliefs and traditions. Later, it talks about reciting scriptures to repay the kindness after the death of one's parents. After the death of one's parents, one begins to repay their profound kindness through the diligent recitation of scriptures. This is precisely what is truly meant by showing deep reverence for the deceased and thoughtfully remembering those who have passed away. So generally speaking, whether it is the unfortunate death of our beloved parents or the death of relatives and friends, if we use other ways, such as alternative methods, such as being especially sad, crying, making a scene, these are all of no real use. This includes when our own teachers pass away or enter parinirvana. There is also absolutely no need to be especially sorrowful or distressed. In the biography of the revered Master Tsongkhapa, or perhaps in the biography of the Venerable Kedrupje, when the great Master Tsongkhapa manifested his parinirvana, Kedrupje was especially and profoundly heartbroken. At that time, his lineage disciples and the people in the monastery were all extremely sad and in despair, every single one of them. They lost interest in reciting scriptures and doing virtuous deeds and put everything aside. Later, he thought to himself, "We are people who practice the true Dharma. We shouldn't be just like worldly people when faced with death, falling into profound grief and utter despair. Instead, we should deeply contemplate the profound concept of impermanence and continue to spread the Dharma, benefit sentient beings, and engage in study, reflection, and practice." Then he wrote some verses. "I have carefully read Kedrupje's verses, which were written upon the parinirvana of the revered Master Tsongkhapa. These particular verses were especially well written and remarkably poignant, creating a vivid impression. I think I read them before I became a Buddhist monk. At that time, he said, 'The sun and moon of the entire world have tragically fallen from sky. Consequently, the entire world has been plunged into a profound and overwhelming darkness. The protector of my heart, the one who offered solace and security, has irrevocably departed. From this moment forward, never again will we be able to see his gentle smiling face and expressions,' and so on. All of the great Kedrupje's heartfelt remembrances and recollections of his beloved teacher are written in such a particularly moving and touching way. So whether we're thinking of our own teachers or our spiritual friends, when they manifest parinirvana, on the one hand, we should carefully contemplate their inherent impermanence and fleeting nature. Their manifestation for us is also a kind of impermanence. On the other hand, we must also inherit their Dharma lineage. We should continue to diligently spread the authentic and profound Dharma. I truly think that this is an extremely important aspect. Then, from the perspective of ordinary people, when someone is dying and approaching death, whether for our parents or for our relatives and loved ones, we should definitely do some virtuous good deeds and merit-making activities to help them with their rebirth process. This is exactly what His Holiness taught us before. In one of his profound teachings, he once said, if a person has committed extremely serious negative karma, but at the very time of the death, if he himself regards these negative deeds as minor, thinking they are very small, insignificant, and not a big deal, if someone dies while in such a pure and virtuous state of mind, they will not be tainted or contaminated by negative karma and unwholesome deeds. If a person usually practices meditation and dharma very well, but at the time of death, he feels that his own negative karma is especially heavy and gives rise to anger, then at that moment he will definitely fall into lower realms. Therefore, the state of mind, the mindset, the state of one's consciousness at the moment of death is profoundly and extremely crucial. At that pivotal time, because we are about to leave this earthly world, we should try our utmost best to remain in such a serene and composed state. Today, I have seen some of our Vajrayana class members, some Dharma friends who have suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. But it seems that before this truly significant event happened, their faith and devotion in the Three Jewels and these particular spiritual aspects are especially good and strong. Indeed, they should be quite good and well developed in these important respects and areas of practice. Therefore, the view at the time of death, this point is very important. As I mentioned earlier, in the Abhisheka Sutra, it was mentioned that if a person neither takes genuine refuge nor diligently keeps the sacred precepts and has accumulated very heavy negative karma, however, if, as he approaches the moment of death, he sincerely take refuge in the precious 3 jewels, then what kind of person is this? The Buddha said in the Abhisheka Sutra, if any good man or good woman at the time of death is able to give rise to this mind, there will be none who will not be freed from all suffering. That if there is a virtuous man or woman who, at the crucial moment of death, sincerely and wholeheartedly gives rise to a virtuous mind or bodhicitta, or thinks of Amitabha Buddha, or thinks of Shakyamuni Buddha, or truly thinks of benefiting all sentient beings in existence, and passes away with such virtuous and wholesome thoughts, then there is not a single individual who will not be completely and utterly liberated from all forms of suffering and distress. They will undoubtedly attain this liberation in a remarkably short period of time. So for each and every one of us personally, when it comes to honoring the end and remembering the distant past, in the end, everyone must inevitably pass through this stage of life. At that time, we should have made all kinds of preparations in advance. As a dedicated practitioner, as mentioned in the Tibetan Pure Land practice, there was an old man, and when the father and his son were having a profound and meaningful conversation, I forget whether it was the son or the father who said this, he then asked, "How do you truly and effectively practice for death?" He replied, "I haven't died before, so I can't recall anything. I don't know how it is." Then he said, "Oh, if that's the case, your practice hasn't been very successful. As a practitioner, you should have already experienced dying many times yourself. You should have trained yourself very well. Only such a person is a true practitioner." So if we want to truly become dedicated practitioners, we should repeatedly go through the profound experience of death many, many times. In this way, on the one hand, you absolutely won't be afraid when the crucial time comes. You won't panic or get flustered at all, nor will your mind become completely chaotic at that very moment, or become confused and quite unclear. That simply won't happen. At that particular time, you will also know for yourself, oh, I probably don't have any other hopes left now. That's why when many practitioners reach the end of their lives, they are very calm and composed, even though the physical sensations, including the torment of certain illnesses and so on and so forth, are still very frightening. This is not only true for us, but also for many great masters of previous generations. They too, at the very moment of their passing, often manifested many discernible forms of intense physical suffering and considerable discomfort, but indeed their inner minds always remained profoundly settled in a particularly stable, serene, and remarkably pure state of profound tranquility. This is important. That is how I perceive and understand it. This concept can be explained and understood from a comprehensive worldly perspective, or alternatively, if we explain it from a more profound and intricate Buddhist perspective. For example, if your beloved teacher has already passed away and is no longer with us, as a very devoted and truly committed disciple of the spiritual lineage, no matter how many years have passed since the revered teacher's passing, he may very often recall and remember his esteemed teacher. Consequently, we often hold solemn and meaningful memorial ceremonies for certain highly respected teachers. For example, Mifam Rinpoche passed away in 1912, which is 100 years ago. Back in 2012, a truly memorable and important centennial memorial ceremony was officially held to commemorate this momentous occasion. And for Master Tsongkhapa, it seems that this year marks the 600th anniversary of his passing, a truly significant historical event. Many Tibetan Buddhist monasteries are commemorating this occasion. The memorial ceremonies for Master Tsongkhapa, and when they hold these ceremonies, they mainly use the stages of the path to enlightenment as the subject of study and discussion, offering it in this way as a form of tribute. This is how they make Dharma offerings. A Dharma offering is not just reciting some other sutra, but rather diligently studying and practicing the profound stages of the path to enlightenment. This is the meaningful way they respectfully commemorate their revered teachers and their invaluable teachings. So it is also necessary for us in the very near future, when it comes to a certain particular teacher, or when commemorating these esteemed and influential teachers, then you can utilize and disseminate some of their teachings, including a comprehensive collection of their collected works, whether by publishing them through various reputable channels or by actively promoting them in a multitude of meaningful and far-reaching ways. This kind of approach might be the best form of Dharma offering and the very best way to truly commemorate them all indeed. This can also be said to be a way to cultivate virtue among the people. As disciples of the lineage, it can demonstrate their teachers' virtues, and clearly show that the esteemed teacher has indeed passed down all of their profound wisdom and boundless compassion, ultimately come together in something truly meaningful and profoundly significant. That concludes our detailed discussion of Chapter 9. Next, we will talk about Chapter 10, a very important section. This particular chapter is primarily about Zikin questioning Zigong, a key interaction. Some people say that Zikin was not a direct disciple of the revered Confucius, while on the other hand, others firmly assert that he was indeed a student and follower of the great sage. But regardless of any other considerations, he was indeed a full 40 years younger than the esteemed Confucius. As for Zigong, among all of Confucius's vast and numerous 3,000 disciples, he was in all likelihood probably considered the very best and most outstanding one. In the ancient text known as the Analects, he appears approximately 30 times or so throughout its various sections. He's the most frequently mentioned figure in the text. And on one occasion, Zigong approached Confucius and asked, "Could you please tell me what you believe to be the very best motto for one to live by throughout their life?" Confucius responded, "Indeed, the fundamental principle is this: do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire to experience or have imposed upon you." He was indeed 31 full years younger than the revered Confucius, a significant age difference. As mentioned earlier, among his 3,000 devoted disciples, after Confucius passed away, they all observed a period of mourning for 3 full years. But Zigong, a truly dedicated disciple, actually mourned for an extended period of 6 years. He truly felt a deep and abiding sense of gratitude toward his esteemed teacher. Generally speaking, when someone receives the teacher's innermost teachings, when they inherit his lineage, they will, from the bottom of their heart, definitely feel a sense of gratitude. This is not only the case in Buddhism, but also true in the secular world. Whether one studies medicine or science, any outstanding disciple, when they receive a great deal of wisdom from a certain professor, if they gain a lot of wisdom from them, they will always feel grateful to their teacher. Last year, when I went to Shanghai Jiao Tong University, there was a professor there. This particular professor just kept talking continuously about his beloved teacher, and as he spoke and reminisced, he kept crying emotionally. He said with deep feeling, "All the wisdom and knowledge that exists in my mind stream right now comes directly from him." But unfortunately, his beloved teacher had already passed away, sadly. He said, "When my wife at home was pregnant and giving birth, I couldn't actually be there to personally accompany her. But when my beloved teacher eventually passed away, I steadfastly stayed by his side until he finally left this earthly world." So, in this very world, it is indeed truly the case that when we receive the intentions of our teacher, when we truly receive the teacher's innermost and profound teachings, the deep gratitude we feel toward them far surpasses that toward our worldly parents. Because our physical body truly comes from our parents, but our wisdom life, our spiritual wisdom body, truly comes from our esteemed teacher. Whether it is a worldly teacher or what we commonly refer to as a master or indeed a spiritual teacher, at that particular moment in time, Zikin and some historical commentaries and scholarly mentions explicitly indicate and further elaborate upon. Because the previous content and discussion was quite serious and heavy, now when we arrive at this particular part of the text, let's tell a more relaxed and light-hearted story with some poetic atmosphere and mood. Zikin called Zigong over to a quiet corner by the wall. But all of this historical narrative was probably made up by later generations who truly knows the full truth, as it's not entirely clear in historical records either. He then took him to a different place and quietly and respectfully asked him, saying, our esteemed teacher, our great teacher Confucius, as for the various states, he went to many places. Wasn't it widely said that he extensively traveled around the various states? Didn't Confucius himself go to many, many different countries to teach and impart his wisdom? So in this particular case, did he always hear about their government because he actively sought it out, or was it simply offered to him? Perhaps Zigong, a diligent and observant disciple, often traveled extensively with the esteemed teacher. So when he asked him, he might have known, just like some of us, when you travel with your teacher, you might be asked, well, what does he usually eat? Is he generally good-tempered? Are you feeling very happy? No, not happy at all, in fact. It was a very painful experience. Should I talk about what exactly happened last year? Should I tell it or perhaps not tell it? There was someone, a particular individual, when we went on our journey to Sweden, and indeed when we made our way to Sweden, I had a Dharma friend with me, helped me do many different things and various tasks, serving as my attendant and assistant, because at that particular time period we traveled extensively and went to many different countries, including Sweden, Switzerland, Israel, Spain, Norway, and several other European and international destinations during our extended journey. We visited quite a few countries. Before we had even finished our very first stop, the initial country on our journey, a certain lay practitioner came over and spoke to this Dharma friend. "Wow, you are so incredibly lucky being with the master. You must be feeling so very happy." I said, "Not really happy at all. When you're with me, the schedule is packed very tightly. It's extremely exhausting." And that Dharma friend said, yes, it's indeed very tough and challenging. He's actually a very straightforward and direct individual in his communication, because I was right there next to him, but he didn't care about that at all. Yes, it's very tough indeed. And then that lay practitioner felt a little bit embarrassed. He said to us, "Is that truly the case? But you all look so happy to me. You get to travel to so many wonderful places." And then I changed the subject. I said, sometimes it's really tough, and sometimes it's truly not. People who are inside always think that those people outside are much more free and unrestricted, while people who are outside always think that those people inside have much better opportunities and advantages. So perhaps Zigong, at that particular time, often traveled abroad internationally with Confucius in this way and manner. So back to the text, he said, "When you embark on journeys to these various countries, our esteemed teacher would consistently emphasize, and he always did, hear about a great deal of important political matters." And these particular political matters, was it our teacher, Confucius? Did he personally seek them out himself? Or were they perhaps given to him by other powerful rulers? This raises the fundamental question of whether he actively sought them, or if they were simply bestowed upon him. Did these rulers give them to Confucius, or did Confucius seek them out himself? What exactly was the situation? So at that time he asked this question, and Zigong was actually quite skillful and truly resourceful. When he answered, he always did so with great wisdom and thoughtful consideration. On one hand, he had already answered in principle, but on the surface and outwardly, it's not particularly clear or obvious. So sometimes when we're answering questions for other people, sometimes we can answer directly, and other times from a different angle. On the one hand, we've already answered the question for them, but on the other hand, if we say it too bluntly, it might be too straightforward. And when that's not very appropriate, we can use another skillful and tactful way to answer this particular question. This is indeed a very good method. So when he answered at that time, he said, "Confucius possessed 5 profound and essential virtues. The very first of these remarkable virtues is warmth. He truly attained these admirable qualities through his inherent warmth, demonstrating kindness, respect, frugality, and humility." He said that Confucius had 5 essential aspects of virtue. Which 5? The first and foremost is warmth. Warmth in this context means being gentle, peaceful, and compassionate, demonstrating a kind and benevolent disposition towards others. It's not about being especially rough or barbaric. In fact, being truly gentle is really quite important for a person. When you see some people, even their facial expressions are very gentle and kind. They have a calm appearance, not an angry one. And whether it's in speaking or in doing things, of course, with some people you can't tell at first glance, just like a cat's claws. At first you can't see a cat's claws. They're hidden in its fur. However, once it catches a small mouse or a bird, its claws and talons become incredibly sharp. In a similar vein, some individuals' volatile tempers or deeply sensitive hearts can also exhibit this kind of sudden, intense sharpness. At first, you absolutely cannot discern anything at all. It's just like that. But in the end, they can strike very fiercely and with great power and impact. So the first is, our teacher consistently possessed the profound virtue of gentleness. Second, he was remarkably kind-hearted. He was genuinely kind to everyone, extending his warmth to all people he encountered. Not just kind to those in positions of authority, or only in front of people he needed something from, pretending to be especially kind, while inside filled with resentment and complaints. It's not like that at all. We should be particularly kind and compassionate to everyone. In fact, a truly good person, whether to those above or below, especially to those in higher positions, many people, even if they have just a bit of wisdom, dare not be unkind. They truly have no other choice but to act in that way. But deep down inside, Look at some employees in companies nowadays. Inside, they are filled with intense hatred, but on the surface, they just say, okay, all right, boss, whatever you say, it's no problem. But deep down, their anger and resentment surge powerfully like a raging, uncontrollable fire. This intense emotional turmoil, a profound sense of injustice and bitterness, is certainly not how it should be. Take Confucius, for example. He was truly a remarkably kind-hearted and benevolent individual. In the past, His Holiness would often thoughtfully say, we should always act with a kind heart and truly virtuous conduct. This fundamental principle is the basic principle for every person to live by and uphold. So this is the second important point. He possesses genuine kindness. The third characteristic is respectfulness. When it comes to respectfulness, it's not just about being respectful to your boss or superiors. You should always be truly humble and respectful to everyone. Be very modest and very respectful. Be polite and have a sense of respect. And this too should come from the heart, especially for those of us who work in service roles, for those who serve with intention. I also hope that there are still a few individuals whose stories are more complicated. Some behaviors really are, for example, when they see a certain person, such as a Dharma teacher, or someone who is a bit of a steward or in a position of authority. And then with ordinary people or some elderly people, some of whom may not seem very impressive, in front of those kinds of people, they act especially rough. Not only are they not respectful, they look down on them or even harbor strong dislike. When it comes to doing many things, in such cases, we're not even talking about Mahayana Buddhism. They don't even have the sense of respect for others that Confucius had. Confucius's respect for others was not just respect for his teachers, but rather he genuinely had this profound kind of respect for absolutely everyone without exception. In fact, these virtues are something that each of us still really needs even today. We may not have cultivated these particular virtues, nor have we really talked about them, and they haven't been discussed in class either, nor have our teachers or parents talked about them. So how would we know that respect is a virtue and that disrespect is? Some people might even say, if we just jump in and directly criticize others, that means we are truly very brave, and that means we are indeed quite capable and strong. But statements like that might not be reasonable. So the third important point talks about showing proper respect and reverence, and then the fourth point specifically mentions frugality, thrift, and careful moderation in all things. The ancient sages and wise people particularly valued and emphasized these important virtues. Who knows, every grain in the bowl comes from hard work. This is something we very, very often indeed say. Whether it's food or clothing, it's true that from now on we should still cultivate the important virtue of saving money and being financially prudent and truly frugal. This way we won't diminish our blessings, and that's very important. Some time ago, I had a meal with a monk from Africa, a very insightful experience. While we were eating our meal, in my plate, I had left a few very small grains of rice. He very clearly and directly said to me, Khenpo, when we eat our food in Africa, we always make sure to finish everything completely on our plates, leaving absolutely nothing behind. We don't even leave behind a single grain of rice. He explicitly stated this in front of a large number of people. Then I looked around and saw there were quite a few people, so I said, okay. I immediately ate those 2 tiny grains of rice right then and there. After eating and coming back, I reflected on it myself. From now on, unless there are special circumstances, for example, if the food is really unpalatable sometimes, then maybe there's no way to deal with it. But aside from that, I think it truly is. This is a very good lesson for me indeed. In the future, when I eat, I will absolutely not leave even a single solitary grain of rice or a single tender vegetable leaf behind. I also know that when I went to Africa, those Africans, if there was even a tiny bit of oil in our soup, just a few little oil droplets like stars, they would typically put it in water and then drink it, because it was especially nutritious. For them, it really was like that. In this world of ours, there are now more than 5,000 children who die of hunger every single year. So from this moment on, truly, including today, if there are some teachers from our school listening to this lecture, I sincerely hope that in your schools, even though I consistently ask them every single year, every semester, to thoughtfully include essential things like financial frugality, personal hygiene, and overall health and well-being, as well as morality and good manners, and to offer them some valuable courses on traditional culture and on virtues, but even more important is the practice of frugality, a valuable principle. I've noticed that some of our young children simply just, for example, with their food, there are many things left uneaten on their plates, and they just throw it straight into the trash can. There is still a lot of rice left in their bowls. Sometimes half of it is just dumped there. Compared to before, things are a bit better now, but it's still not good enough. This includes some of the Buddhist colleges in our monastery. I hope all of you should definitely also talk to them as well. I've also personally spoken to the Khenpos about this particular matter. So when I received these profound teachings from that time on every day, actually, I myself often, originally I wouldn't leave much food uneaten either, but indeed, when I'm not careful, sometimes just 1 or 2 grains of rice are unfortunately overlooked and not taken seriously enough. So now when it comes to the act of eating, we must ensure that if there is any food left over, I hope everyone makes an effort to pack it up and doesn't waste it. And when it comes to clothing and dress, it's exactly the same way. We should also try to be as economical and thrifty as possible. And for all other various expenses and costs in life, we should try to save and conserve some money as much as we can to help those around us who are in need, whether they are patients or elderly people living alone or impoverished students. In recent years, we've also been involved in charity work and have truly helped a great many people, especially those individuals who simply couldn't afford to go to a traditional college education. And actually, these important things, if we are truly able to do them, we absolutely should do them. If we don't, many valuable opportunities and significant chances will just pass us by, unfortunately, and we may never have those opportunities again. So I think if we truly want to do something meaningful and impactful, then it should start with ourselves first. I've noticed that those individuals who are truly blessed and wealthy tend to be even more frugal and careful. On the other hand, those who are less fortunate, originally they were particularly poor and impoverished, but those people are particularly extravagant and wasteful in their spending, including when they're drinking alcohol and eating meals. And seeing this situation unfold truly saddens me deeply. It genuinely feels as though an immense amount of valuable resources are being carelessly squandered and utterly wasted. In actual fact, every single precious grain of rice, or indeed every delicate leaf of vegetable, possesses its very own unique and traceable origin. We should always remember where our blessings come from. Only in this way can we truly understand ourselves more deeply and realize that if we currently have some blessings, we should continue to actively accumulate them. Otherwise, if we use up everything we have, we might never have such opportunities again in the future. This particular point is about frugality and being economical. Then the 5th important virtue is yielding. Yielding means forbearance, patience, or showing humility and modesty. In many different situations and circumstances, we should always try our absolute best to yield to others whenever it is possible to do so. We should bear the failures and losses ourselves and offer the significant benefits and well-deserved victories to others. Of course, it's easy to say this, but in reality, when we truly encounter matters concerning ourselves, many people find themselves unable to do it. Usually, we say things like benefiting all sentient beings throughout the world, and we say it very decisively and clearly. But when it comes to even the very smallest matters in our lives, many people reveal their true selves. This includes all sorts of situations, and whenever it concerns themselves, then there's absolutely no way to yield or give to other people. In our Tibetan region, there's a particular saying that goes, 1 year of famine brings 100 years of bad reputation. The meaning is, for example, if there happens to be a serious famine for 1 year, some people might do things they cannot speak of openly, dishonorable things like stealing and such. The famine may only last for a single year, but their truly bad reputation will indeed be passed down for 100 years. So, at critical moments, we should always do our best and strive to achieve the most positive outcomes, even if it's just about securing a seat or something that is truly our own, like when we jointly rent a car together, for example. Many people rush to grab the seat by the window first. Of course, some people might get carsick, but some individuals are especially selfish, and always, particularly when there are a significant number of people present, we can observe it quite clearly. When getting on a bus, they often do not line up properly at times like these, which can be quite frustrating for others to witness. So when it's time to receive a blessing object, they stand up and start shouting loudly and vociferously. People like this, in the end, because of just 1 or 2 individuals, other more impatient people start to stand up too. In the end, no one gets anything. Originally, if everyone had a mindset of patience and yielding, at most it might take half an hour, or at most about 40 minutes for absolutely everyone to fully get it. But regrettably, because of a few truly selfish people, when this unfortunate kind of thing happens, many important things ultimately end up not being successfully achieved. As the ancient said, indeed, just having these qualities, I think we are still practitioners, and at the very least, we should become good Mahayana practitioners. When it's convenient for you, prepare some simple notebooks or diaries. Look at what we talked about before, respecting the deceased and remembering our ancestors, or as it's discussed here, the 5 characters: gentleness, kindness, respect, frugality, and humility. These 5 words may seem very simple, but their meaning is something that we can truly use for an entire lifetime, or even for many, many lifetimes to come. We can make a solemn vow to diligently apply them and truly use them. So at that particular time, Zigong said, Confucius was a person who possessed such virtues. He was someone who had attained these virtues. Therefore, the way the master pursued them, the master's particular way of seeking knowledge, his specific seeking to hear about politics and governance, should definitely be different from other people's way of seeking. His method and style of expression is very skillful and tactful. He didn't say that Confucius was seeking, nor did he say that others took initiative to teach him. He didn't put it that way. He said, Confucius, you know, our teacher is truly an extraordinary person. Even if he were to seek something, the way he seeks is indeed quite distinct and notably different from others, isn't it? Actually, this method of communication still carries an amount of profound meaning and deep implications, doesn't it? In this chapter, the primary and central focus is unequivocally placed upon the fundamental principles of how one should conduct oneself and be a person. To be a virtuous person, one should possess noble conduct and uphold moral principles. These 5 essential virtues, as detailed in other ancient texts, including other parts of the Book of Rites. It is also stated that in other books as well. I haven't gone through each one. I didn't have the time, but Mifam Rinpoche has also actually mentioned chasing merit and virtue, failing to obtain them, because the tree of merit and virtue stands firm in the garden of noble conduct, that when it comes to our merit, if you try to pursue it, to chase after it, if you desperately chase after it, you may not necessarily obtain it. But this kind of true tree of merit, in fact, it often stands tall in what kind of place? In the spacious courtyard of noble character and noble virtue, just like a tree. If it grows in a cultivated garden or in a wild, untamed forest, it should always grow in a particularly dignified and honorable way. So a person's inherent merit, their true worth, is not without cause or condition. There must be causes and conditions. What kind of causes and conditions? At the very least, it is that one possesses a noble character. And what is noble character? In fact, it is to possess these 5 qualities. We can say, who has a noble character? If someone possesses these 5 qualities, they are gentle and very kind, respectful to everyone, and they themselves are not at all wasteful or overly excessive in any way. And when doing anything at all times, they are always truly humble and yielding to others. In this way, as we often say in Mahayana Buddhism, such as in The Way of the Bodhisattva, and also in significant treatises like the Compendium of Trainings, as thoroughly discussed in these important texts and teachings, when it comes to being a good person, there may not be anything more than this. Apart from this, one should also give rise to bodhicitta and aspire to attain Buddhahood. These aspects represent even higher states. But as for being a good person, indeed, it's true that we have these 5 important characters and virtues. If you yourselves have genuine interest and curiosity, take these 5 characters and write them by your own bedside, or even better, engrave them deeply in your own heart. These 5 words, I think no matter how forgetful you are, you should be able to memorize them, right? If you cannot even memorize just 5 simple words, then how could you possibly hope to recite 5,000 intricate verses? So this is precisely how it should be understood. Now we are at the very beginning of chapter 11. The root text of chapter 11 goes like this. Confucius said, "When the father is alive, observe the son's aspirations. When the father has passed away, observe the son's actions. If for 3 years he does not change from his father's way, he can truly be called filial. If the father is still alive, you should always observe his will and wishes, or perhaps your own will." There are 2 ways to interpret this. If the father is alive, why should you observe his will? Because after all, your father's intentions, what are his thoughts like? You need to observe them. Here, the word observe can mean to watch, but also to contemplate, to deeply reflect, or to carefully ponder. It can also mean to thoroughly analyze and to meticulously investigate. So when your father's alive, you should carefully reflect on my own father. What exactly is he thinking in his heart? This is one way to interpret it. There's another interpretation method available. Observe their aspirations carefully when their father is still alive. As a son or daughter, one should also observe one's own intentions. Here, the possessive pronoun his can refer to the father, but it can also refer to oneself. If it refers to oneself, when your father is alive, you need to carefully observe your own mindset, all aspects of your innermost heart and your deepest aspirations. What kind of person are you when your father is present? You observe yourself. This is indeed the very first point. Then once the father is no longer present, you then carefully observe his actions. If the father is no longer around, therefore you must pay attention to his behavior and action. If you truly desire to carry on this profound legacy and bring great honor to your esteemed ancestors, then it is absolutely crucial that you fully understand his action, his various undertakings, and indeed the entirety of the father's diligent work. These are things you must observe and know. Once the father, the deceased patriarch of the family, has passed away, whether in the Han regions or in any other location in general, in the past it was mostly the case that whatever the father did, the son would do the same. In this case, you should understand his actions. You could put it this way, or if the father is not around, you need to observe your own behavior. It's very likely that if your father is not present, your behavior could potentially become a complete and utter mess. Because in the past, your father often kept you strictly in check. Now, once your parents are truly gone, you become like an orphan. At that time, you might start doing bad things, and it's possible you could end up doing all sorts of things. So at that time, you need to observe your own behavior. There are actually two possible explanations for this. In any case, it's truly best not to change your father's established ways within the first 3 years. If your father unfortunately passes away for a period of 3 full years, here, the 3, some commentaries say that it is indeed a figurative number, not a literal one. In ancient times, it didn't necessarily mean 1, 2, or 3, but rather it meant many. So for many years, you should diligently maintain whatever your esteemed father used to do, you must absolutely continue to do. Of course, in some commentaries, it is clearly said that it mainly refers to the reasonable behaviors of the father. If they are unreasonable, for example, if the father was a thief every day and did bad things, and you also steal things like your father for 3 years, that would indeed be quite problematic. It certainly doesn't mean you must necessarily inherit such bad behaviors. Many people say that after their dearly departed father passes away during the 3 years, if you continuously maintain and uphold such family traditions and inheritance consistently over many years like this, then you are truly a genuinely filial person. So what important insights can we clearly see from this understanding? The father is also very important to us while he is alive. We must establish a very good and meaningful relationship. If he is no longer here, we should continue to carry on his wishes and his enduring legacy. This is indeed a very important aspect as well, and it should be noted. Otherwise, many of us nowadays, the relationship between father and son is very cold while they are alive. It seems there is nothing in common with our parents. Whether it's making phone calls or interacting in their daily lives, nowadays the current situation in many families is quite bad. For example, parents are often watching television while the children are playing on the computer by themselves. There isn't a single shared topic, and it's always like this. It wasn't like this in the past. But now, maybe because it's the age of technology and artificial intelligence, with all kinds of dazzling and abundant information, the relationships between people and their connections, whether it's between father and son or between a husband and a wife, many of these important personal human relationships, everyone is just doing their own thing. Especially now that we have smartphones, people basically don't care about each other at all. In the end, they become estranged. Even if someone dies, some people don't really feel anything. For example, when parents pass away, in the past people were extremely sad. It felt as if the sky was falling. But now for many young people, when their parents die, they might even feel happier, because if the family property goes to them, for a while they can spend the money as much as they truly want. Maybe there really are a few truly unfilial people indeed, and it's quite hard to say if they truly have these kinds of thoughts. So the teachings of parents are actually very precious indeed. They are truly valuable. The most crucial thing now is that some people, parents and children, live in two different worlds. What the parents say, the children don't listen to, and when children have their own ideas, the parents don't accept them. Actually, I think both sides should respect each other. Because even though parents may not be educated, they might not fully understand modern computers or many of the new and emerging technologies available today, but they truly have a great deal of profound wisdom and many skills, which children should learn from. You shouldn't look down on or underestimate them. In fact, they are very important teachers. And as for parents, you also shouldn't think that everything your child says is just trash culture, because a lot of the new knowledge in today's modern era might only be truly enjoyed and appreciated by the children. So if both sides have a good and healthy relationship, parents can effectively tell stories to their children, and children tell stories to their parents. When we were much younger, every single night was truly and completely about telling captivating and imaginative stories. Back then, there weren't really any lights or things like that. During the daytime, we would gather firewood, and at night, we'd light a really big and warm fire. I've also talked about this in Footprints of the Journey. My mother had a wealth of vivid stories, and she would often and vividly tell them. If we asked her to, she would tell stories we had truly never heard before, perhaps ones she really made up herself. But sometimes we didn't really like listening to stories she'd already told. So sometimes we would take turns telling stories. It felt like everyone spent a long time together, either reciting scriptures or just chatting. Back then there was probably no information. That might be the reasons. But it is undeniably true that later on in my life, including my own personal experiences, every time I interacted with my parents, there was always a lot of common ground between us. We really did have things in common to talk about. But now it seems like a lot of people just make a quick phone call and say a few words, and then there isn't much left to talk about between them. It's just, how's your health? Do you want to go out? And now some young people in the Western world, they often tend to say things like, let's go have some fun later. They truly think after their beloved parents are gone, then they'll really go out and thoroughly enjoy themselves. They unfortunately see their own parents as a burden or as something they just absolutely don't want to be with at all. If they have their own lives, they feel it's much better to be with like-minded people. Actually, this kind of thinking, in a certain sense, it can indeed significantly distance the relationships between people, creating a noticeable gap. And if you treat your parents this way, in the foreseeable future, whether it's with your spouse or the relationship with your very own children, it will most definitely end up in precisely the same way. Just like in the Sigalovada Sutta, when parents pass away, you see when the Buddha himself went out for alms in the ancient city of Rajagriha, he would often pause. Sigala got up in the morning and went to the city gate, firstly bathed in the open courtyard and then prostrated to the 6 directions, east, south, west, north, up and down. The Buddha asked, "What are you doing here? Why are you doing this?" He replied, "When my father passed away, he left me a will saying, if you want to pay respects in the future, prostrate to the east, south, west, north, up and down. And ever since then, I've never dared to go against my father's teachings. I have always paid respects in this way." Later, the Buddha told him, the way you pay respects also exists in Buddhism. But actually, there is another way to pay respects. Then, the Buddha began to elaborate on this topic. So, regarding the words of fathers, even in the Brahmanical religious tradition, they also value and respect the father's authoritative words. I have mentioned this concept before, haven't I? In the Jataka tales of the 6 perfections, there was a king. This particular king was extremely kind and benevolent. He governed and ruled this entire nation wisely. Later on, there emerged an evil king nearby. He planned to annex this country. At that time, the kind-hearted king thought, if we go to war, many people might be lost. So he decided to hand over all the affairs of state to him. Then he left on his own. He just left the government behind, and the evil king took over everything. After taking over, a Brahmin later went up into the mountains. He went to the mountains to ask the kind-hearted king for a little money. He said, "I don't have any money." But the Brahmin kept on insisting. So he finally said, "If that's truly the case, then please tie me up. Hand me over to that wicked king, and you'll most certainly be rewarded handsomely indeed." So the Brahmin did as he suggested. Later, the evil king captured this man. He was about to sentence him to death. When the sentence was about to be carried out, the kind-hearted king was among the large crowd. He knew his young son was hiding in there. He then shouted loudly and with great force, "Today I am being sentenced to death by this powerful king. But I have one final heartfelt wish. In the future, no one should ever seek revenge. This is my solemn and final will." After he had finished speaking, they tragically killed him. After he was killed, his young son was still very young at that time. Later, as he gradually grew up, he became one of the most truly capable ministers under that wicked king. One time, the king and this minister went deep into the dense forest together, side by side. It seemed that they got lost. Only the king and he himself were left completely alone. At that moment, he thought, "It was actually the king who killed my father. I must kill him." He drew his sword. Because the king was too tired at the time, he had fallen asleep. He was about to strike him down. At that very moment, he suddenly remembered his beloved father's final words before dying, saying that absolutely no one should seek revenge. And at that moment, he still carefully and deliberately put his sword back into its ornate sheath. At that precise moment, the sleeping king suddenly and abruptly woke up from his deep slumber. He said, "Why did I have such a bad omen in my dream?" At that time, the minister said, "Actually, you tragically killed my own beloved father. I am his son. I originally intended to kill you today. But then I clearly remembered my father's wise teachings. So today I mercifully spared you, spared your precious life." At that very moment, the king was extremely grateful. Later, he generously returned the original kingdom to him as well, allowing him to continue ruling his country. This significant story is found in the ancient Buddhist scriptures. I'm not entirely sure if I've actually told this before. So for some of us, the profound teachings and wise words of our parents in certain specific situations really resonate and guide us through life. No matter how great the difficulty, we will certainly carry them out. This is indeed the virtue of the ancients. And in Buddhism as well, there are many such ideas. So whether we consider this from a worldly perspective or indeed from a profound Buddhist perspective, we can see that when the master or teacher is present, you should observe your thoughts and intentions, the master's inner meaning and intentions. Then once the master is no longer present, you should uphold his conduct, whether it is spreading the Dharma and benefiting sentient beings, or simply observing your own mind. At that time, there will be no one to teach you. No matter what, whether it is 3 years or many years, the traditions of your master not be changed lightly. Some people, in the second year after their master passed away, they completely change all the temples beyond recognition. This is actually a very unfilial act indeed, and quite disrespectful to one's parents. In some cases, even after the master has passed away for many years, they continue to spread his teachings. In fact, this truly should be considered the most profoundly important thing, to diligently keep doing this for many, many years. This is also what is precisely called filial piety in Buddhism, to rely on a qualified spiritual teacher in a proper and authentic way. Therefore, for us as well, it is important, everyone present here is not someone who has come to this world like Guru Padmasambhava. So in this case, towards your own parents, if they are still alive, you should pay attention to their innermost thoughts and care for them. If they have passed away, then in different situations, you can recite sutras and perform rituals to help them be liberated. This will greatly help them. And often you will always fondly recall the things your parents used to say to you. In your daily life and in your practice, you should put these into practice regularly. In this way, this is true filial piety. All right, that's all for today.
Bandara Padma Sodargye